Hello, everyone, and welcome to what really is our final show on Esoterics Today. I am your co-host, Amber, the Suburban Lightworker, and we have with us, as always, in this journey, Satara Jules Lightbringer. Welcome, Satara, to our last show together.
I know, how exciting.
We've been doing this every month for how long?
Well, this last show will have tipped us into the third year.
Tipped us into the third year, which is a wonderful time here as we come out around this incredible winter solstice. This equinox is incredibly meaningful in my estimation and that of many of us in our tribe. This is the beginning truly of the age of Aquarius. And that's really powerful and beautiful. And we are also going to be seeing something that we've not seen since the Middle Ages here, which is the conjunction, grand conjunction. Is this right, of Venus and Mars?
Shall we try Saturn and Jupiter?
Thank you. Jupiter. Thank you. See, if I didn't have Satara, this is why we have to go together on things. And we're going to see, but we are going to see our planets come very close together in a way we haven't, right, since the Middle Ages. And I think within 1/10 of a degree of each other, and that should be happening right around our equinox period of December 21st, which is when the show usually is slotted to come out. So you'll be seeing that. I welcome.
It's very interesting, actually, because it's believed that it's the same configuration that is being made between Saturn and Jupiter will look like the double star, which is what heralding for the Christians the star in the east. So it's really, really interesting for the timing for it to kind of come round, in December for starters, because obviously for many people they won't quite realise that's not quite the date it was all happening, not even the time of year it was all happening, but it's just interesting that this is like rippling out as part of the programme that is running at the moment.
Well, that is very interesting. And Satara, I do have in my mind something about Venus and another planet being so close together they look conjoined right now.
Yes. Venus is very useful for lining up with quite a few stars. She usually does partner up with Jupiter. So you do usually see those two a lot. Hooking up an awful a lot from a point of view of the star, because usually you see them in the star where you've got Venus is usually closer to the horizon, with Jupiter sort of about 45 degrees to the left of her. They were known as the morning stars, because they were the first to sort of be over the horizon when the sun was coming up. They would still hang there for a while, and then obviously as the sun came further up, they would then be obliterated from view. I
was just thinking of that too. But before we get too far afield, let me introduce to us the episode 3 in our series, From Mara to Earth, Our Planet's Many Expressions. So we're sort of dabbling into some other aspect of that here in the conversation, but introducing this third episode and final episode, which is also the final show of Esoterics Today, I want to remind us, our listeners, where we left off last time. And you can certainly go back and listen to where we were, and even before that as we started the series. Really where we left off was in discussion, now remembering that the series was all about the timeline, the expression that our planet Earth has taken sort of from a humanistic viewpoint of a timeline, and how we went from Mara, that expression that then exploded and became part of what we know of as our Milky Way, our solar system, and moved into Terra, and then our beloved current expression of Gaia, And also then where we went from there was going into the discussion about Atlantis, also sort of our moon expressions. We've talked about that. We talked about Ra being our sun life bringer. And then we moved into discussing Tiamat and Marduk. So particularly this last episode, we were talking about Lemuria and Mu from a seventh dimensional viewpoint. And how this is where we were talking about the humans, or the beings, we should say the beings that were 20 to 25 feet tall. It was kind of a fantastic consideration about what we used to, from this kind of timeline thinking, look like. And how we didn't need the structural shelters that we do today, that these were more etheric living, etheric style living, certainly when we're at the seventh dimensional layer. And we also cross-referenced all of this to the Lyran and Orion electric wars at the third and fourth density, some of that behavior that went on. And frankly, we're still rippling, and we're still dealing with a lot of the structures we're still dealing with today in our 3D. Moving into fourth density is really the ripple out, as Satara has taught us, of the Orion war scenario. And Satara moved us into understanding what is, and introducing the Admin Kadmon, the human embodiment of us, that then went on to be about 15 to 16 feet tall. And this was at the sixth dimensional expression. And this really, what Satara taught us was, this was the first volunteers of beings to wear what we lovingly call skin suits. Okay, and any name you'd like to give it, but we like to talk about our skin suits. And we saw this in 5 main groups. We discussed the priesthood, which would be sixth dimensional, at Laura conduits, crystal workers, manifestors, food and energy developers, the worker race. Now we're really seeing societies that are a little bit resonant to what we have here, at least in way of discussing them going on. Scientists and engineers. We certainly did, in that density or that dimensional living, need shelter, structure, food, but we were certainly engaged with crystalline pyramid energy source for a lot of that living and being. And our skin suits, even at that point that we were discussing this, were not quite in the physical fully, in the way that we know it, certainly not third dimensional. So Satara, I hope I walked through that in a reasonable way, where we've been. Is there anything else you want to let kind of overarching, or anything else about where we've been before I bring us into what we're going to talk about today?
No, I think we left it at a good place, because I do not see the point in dragging up like the end days of like Atlantis. There's no point in bringing that energy to what we're really talking. Every civilization has a beginning and an end. It's just the way this works on this planet particularly.
Yeah, I appreciate that, as a matter of fact, because I think because we have so many embodied souls in form today in the 3D format, and you and I are examples of that, as most of people, as all people who are going to listen to this, we're so resonant to Atlantis and Lemuria, because it is almost our more recent experiences in some cases, and that are not human in the way that we are today. Although all of us have probably had a million incarnations in the human form in the 3D by now, that are listening to this, but in terms of we're very familiar in ourselves with the Lemurian, especially the Lemurian story at the, what would that be, fifth and fourth density, and then maybe that being true of Atlantis as well. And while I'm at it, remind me of this. Would you say that Atlantis beings were these beings fifth and sixth dimensional beings, Sitar, or fourth, fifth, sixth?
They did start to drop down to sort of the fourth dimension by the end of the experiment. But yeah, it started off at sixth and gradually, well, it goes to show how long the civilization lasted for, the fact that you can actually like start to move through the dimensions as a race.
As a race, as a holistic, which is exactly, and maybe I bring that up too, because it triggers my thinking that, well, this is what we're in the midst of now. We are sitting at the end of the piano keyboard, I like to reference, of the harmonics. We're sitting at the end of a third dimensional expression, and we've kind of triggered into the fourth. We've tripped into the piano keys of the fourth of those harmonics. So you begin to see and remember how then that works, and why, for example, what you just said with Atlantis. So you know that this says we're at a really special time, which we have said a lot, I think, in this show, and a lot of other teachers and way showers and the storytellers of the narratives will tell you that about this epoch and at this time, and that we all came for this time because we all come with unique experiences and capabilities that are important for this time as the conduits. So that all said, let me move us now into where we're headed next. So we're really talking post-collapse of Atlantis in total. And Sitar and I were just talking about this is maybe 25, 26 million years ago, if we want to think about it as a human timeline. Although that gets so sticky and difficult to think about it.
It does, because the very nature of everything happening now just completely skews timelines and stuff incredibly. And, you know, some of like artifacts that have been found on this planet, the archaeological timeline is so far out, it's laughable. So I do struggle with the whole timeline aspect of things, because for when I sort of remember the likes of Sumeria, that was set up by a group of survivors that was seeded kind of after the whole collapse of Atlantis. Because although Atlantis went, for all intents and purposes, with such a huge cataclysm of issues on the planet, there were still survivors. You know, some still did manage to actually get away from this. That role was to help with the reseeding of the planet, and there were several pockets of people that did that.
That's my remembrance. Excuse me, I apologize to interrupt, but before I lose the thread on that, what you just said, my own recollection for my soul self is was taking a ship away.
Yeah, totally.
Was to have been removed.
And I was very much the same at that time. I was part of the Atla Ra at that time, and we were holding space, we would call it now, to try and stop the devastation from being as acute as it could be. We were aware that the cataclysm was going to happen months ahead of when it did, because with the gift of foresight, we knew what the plan was, and that plan was unchangeable. So yeah, very, very much so. And I can remember exiting the suit to be moved to a duplicate suit in a ship.
Oh, how interesting. So that's even further than I even have, because the only reason I came to that was in a session with someone who is still working prominently today in the internet sphere. And when we were working together through a lot of light language conversations, I just saw the cataclysm from ship. I actually watched it. Was not, because so many will talk about their experiences in the skin suit and how that went. I am actually removed, and I'm watching
from it. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
interesting. So yeah, I can still see the circle of us holding the space around the main temple with the waves crashing over, knowing that we would drown, but knowing that that was fine.
That's
And at
fantastic.
that point
story,
of drowning, of course, we were just zipped up and here's your dry suit, as opposed to the
Here's
wet
the dry ones. Yeah, I love that. God, I love that, Satara. That's interesting. And for you listeners, this is not a conversation. We're just having it in real time here. We've never talked about this aspect of ourselves,
No.
And how we saw that. So as we move away from Atlantis, then we will best be suited in this conversation to move into really ancient Samaria.
Yeah. Totally.
Could you talk about
it went, you know, because if you think we were all kind of lifted up, everything needed to just settle. If you imagine, we hear about tsunamis and see them now, it's something that we will have all heard of and experienced, even if that's just via a film, you know, in this reality. If you imagine that is what was kind of raging around the planet. So whole islands and land masses went. But as they went down, new ones came up because, you know, it still has to balance out, doesn't it? So this allowed a huge shift of like the land masses and the shapes of what we now really know now, because not a lot has changed since the sea calmed down. Once that ocean had calmed after this catalyst, we're pretty much left with what we've got. You know, yeah, we've had a few volcanic islands have popped up occasionally, but they've also popped down occasionally as well, you know. But yeah, generally we have got the land masses in pretty much what you would see on the world map.
So that's why this makes a great final episode, because it begins, the ancient Sumerian picture begins the lexicon of what we will know as human history.
Yeah, totally.
And this is a third dimensional expression, Satara.
Yeah, it is. Due to the very nature of the cataclysm to move the energies down to that different level, to the 3D.
And I want to speak to that for a moment. My understanding about why, I think because our planet has such a victimizer methodology predominant, or program predominant in the human psyche today, which is in my words, would be considered the inorganic matrix, or for some of the parlance that we're hearing today, or the sort of the artificial matrix. Really, we're talking about having needed the reset that was needed, and to go so the harmonics could be kind of calibrated, was we had to come to a third dimensional expression because of the level of disruption of cataclysm. That was sort of the baseline that could be tolerated in an earth structure. Had to kind of, you can imagine crashing a computer system and having to take it back to MS-DOS.
That's fine. I can program in MS-DOS.
Right? Or COBOL. We had COBOL. We had to go back. We couldn't have any Linux. We couldn't have any, you know, those next and on and on and on. That where we are today, even with tech, consider us that way. We had to kind of be everything had to be kind of brought back to that level of refresh or reset. So where did the ancient peoples of Samaria arrive from, Satara?
Shall we just say that they were brought back on said ships once the devastation had gone? An awful lot of the volunteers that had just been taken a few years earlier, because it obviously took more than a week to sort this out, for it just to subside, to just calm down, because of course tsunamis bring with them terrible winds. So you've got all these like storms raging. So yeah, that all had to kind of just calm down. Once that had calmed down, there was a very brief time to just make sure that flora, fauna and everything was existing because it still survived throughout that. Additional samples were brought in, and it's like, okay, we're great, we're ready for people again. So if you think our North and South Pole now are slightly different to what they were then. They have shifted slightly. When the area was chosen, it was chosen in one of the largest land masses at the time. The climate was not as avert as the equator, which of course is the hottest band that we kind of have around the planet. So it was chosen from a point of view of climate. It was chosen from a point of view of travel, so that it was deemed that from that area people would gradually become nomadic and spread outwards. So it was a good area to populate in. Other areas were populated at the same time. It wasn't just exclusive to Samaria. You've got the likes of South America were starting to be populated. Although not to the extent, because it was a smaller landmass than, Samaria.
I have some questions about that, if I can interject to ask you something question. So, what I think I want our listeners to understand too is it's as it is today. It's like the people that were seeded into the consciousness at that time had to have a consciousness awareness that matched the seeding.
Yes.
And remember, third dimensional living and third dimensional consciousness is a piano, keyboard, a harmonic of its own. So these would have been, and it made me think about Neanderthal, and made me think about Cro-Magnon. So Tara, am I in the right thinking when I think about the consciousness of the peoples that were seeded to the planet?
Yeah, very, very much so, because the consciousness had to be lowered to be able to cope with the nature of the density here. So yes, it was a little bit interesting, shall we say. I personally didn't have that much to do with Samaria, although I know about it because I was on the planet. I was dropped off actually in Australia, or what we think of as Australia. So I was part of a team that was brought in there. Although I wasn't really an inhabitant of the planet, although I was here. That probably sounds really, really weird. Basically, we had what we would think of now as watchers that were beings from higher densities that were keeping a weather eye on what was going on the planet.
And that's what I wanted to I'm glad you mentioned that, because, and by the way, can you remember the sounds or the name of the sounds? Because everything to me is sound, right? Words, anything that comes out of the mouth is really music. And I think that's an important point right about now. Sound. So could you give us an idea of what that aspect of Australia was referred to as at that time?
I probably can, but it's going to be light language.
Go ahead.
I wouldn't know any form of human for it. Okay, let me just go there. Oh, okay, they want a bit more. Right, that's fine. Let me just give you a bit of light language then, just based on particularly Ayers Rock in Australia, which is where we were landed, because the size of the craft that we were on, that was a perfect docking station for it. And it's not a little rock. Might put things into perspective for shape and size for people to get a good visual for that. Okay. Ya tishti ania kiata, uriaki hiaha, unishti yania lataya, una ich ala hetesti turiakana, eate othana osti, iki ala torista.
Wow. So what we got there, now we're understanding, listeners, thank you, Satara, because, and I'm going to tell you what I heard, because I think it's important, and we haven't brought in the light language aspect, that music into the conversation in a few months. But I thought it was an important point here that what we're going to also remember sometimes isn't going to be able to be put into 25 letters of the alphabet, or 26 letters of the alphabet, excuse me, that leaves Z out. And what I heard and I want to demonstrate to our listeners what goes on when you have two, what we would refer to in our gnosis as adepts, ADEPTS, which is Satara and I would be considered as adepts in the way we like to classify things in our linear way here on the planet. What I actually experienced when I heard Satara talking about, what was the name of the rock?
Ezrock.
Where the ship would land and be able to work out of, sort of the mothership of the group who was to assist and to help calibrate our reseeding, particularly from the area that we now know as Australia. I watched as she showed me in the sounds an ability to really almost a crystalline body, very much a crystal body, a fluid crystal, so it'd be like a plasma crystal body that was able to get extremely, extremely tiny or extremely, extremely large, depending on what the service that person was, the service delivery that person was to do, whatever their job was. In some cases, the job was to be that small to calibrate something or an organism, a microorganism, and to be that crystal plasma bridge, so to speak, tying things together, knitting things together. And then I saw what she was telling me was a representation of the very, very large, almost to calibrate the weather, to calibrate the amount of light and what kind of light energy, what kind of sun energy. In other words, to be sort of a portal, a lens for weather. So what I learned out of that expression that Satara gave was that it also, I'm still hearing and seeing that these beings were multidimensional beings, not just from one other density, but from several, because when you go back to calibrate, you've got to have dimensionality represented, and you have to have workers, for lack of a better word, who can come in to do that level of calibration or repair from multiple densities and then multiple dimensions within the densities. Am I catching any of that correctly?
Yep, you're good. So yeah, the adaptability of the fluid suit to be able to working that way.
Yeah, and so I'm going to say that this is why it's my pleasure to be able to demonstrate. This is a level of gnosis that's pretty unusual for today, but it exists because we just demonstrated that. There are people in form today, such as ourselves and such as many of you. And some of this is going to trigger that skill set for those of you that trip across this conversation, because these conversations, although we just have them as just two middle-aged ladies having a chat, because that has been our methodology here, we know nothing is done without incredible meaning and purpose. We're used always in these ways. So I just thought that was a really valuable moment that we saw how then that Satara remembers herself participating from the stabilization of what we would refer to as Samaria, but really over from the landmass into what is today's Australia. So thank you for that moment.
Yeah, no worries. I was just thinking, well, that explains why I knew about Samaria, but I wasn't Sumerian. Yeah, I knew what was going on there. I was at quite a deep level, although I wasn't participating in it overtly.
Yeah. So, right. So these conversations, they're deeply personal because they're also helping us remember ourselves and touch back to things. Just like me asking you if you could say, because I knew it had to be done in a light language format. I sensed that, and for you to go and kind of dust the cobwebs off, because you could also imagine that people like us don't get to have these kinds of conversations or moments very often, unless we're bumping into each other for these purposes. You know, it's an interesting life this time, I think, that way.
Totally. We wouldn't order it in light language in the grocery store, would we?
No, really, we wouldn't. We'd be hauled off. Yeah. So moving us now, so now we have a good sense, Satara, here of the Sumeria receding and why history sort of begins for us in our lexicon in this expression of lifetime with ancient Sumeria. Moving kind of quickly past that, now that we've established what that was all about, and am I correct in positioning these more like what we would go back to Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon, these original man? Would these be suitable to that part of the keyboard?
That was the beginning of it. Obviously, the way that this planet was dealt with at that time, the life forms were evolving very, very quickly. Very quickly. Because it's like at the height of civilization in Babylon, for instance, you're looking at a fully fledged, fully working, fully operational city, monetary bartering systems that go in. There's actual physical money being used rather than just trading, bartering goods. It's turned into a totally different ballgame. You know, one of the main vices in Sumeria was alcohol. So they had already sussed how to be brewing beer and creating wine and spirits by the end of Babylon. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I guess they figured out they needed some kind of anesthesia. After a few thousand years of that, digging in the dirt.
And that's what led to the fall of the place at the end of the day, you know, people getting 3 parts cut and making stupid decisions. But yeah, you could like say that now, couldn't you?
That does not stop. Well, now we move into, because and you did bring up Babylon, so would you suggest then that from the very beginnings of Sumeria, when we would have the early man as we think of them in our textbooks today, of course, so much is left out of our textbooks, but I'm just trying to reach us into things that we did learn about as school children. Could we say then, by the time we get to the Babylonian perspective, because this was sort of a rapid evolutionary process, and you know, we didn't have the internet back then to see how rapid that was. It just occurred, and people didn't have a consciousness that said, well, this is fast, because we didn't also have who we are today, so higher are the harmonic of the 3D, to where we can have this level of consciousness, because consciousness also evolved in a rapid method to the human animal. But I'm going to take a moment and say, but only so far, because here we sit today at the high end of the keyboard of 3D, triggered into, we're early edged over into fourth dimensional living, and frankly, we still have, I would say, 3/4 pretty undeveloped consciousness on our planet. So whereas our physical form and our bartering systems and our money systems, and now we can make wine and beer, woo-woo, by Babylonia, a lot of cool things, and we trigger into the Egyptians, which is where we're going next. Our consciousness is still quite low. It's either still quite primitive on whole on the planet. There are some levels, probably at the priesthood levels and so forth, where we're seeing that developing consciousness, so forth. We do have visitors like here among us then who are holding a higher illuminated consciousness in place, because you have to have a balance, you have to have just enough to keep things copacetic. But by and large, here we are still today with a tiny percentage, less than 3%, I would imagine, and growing, of consciousness folks like ourselves actually, probably Satara and I demonstrate even a point something in terms of the consciousness spiral. So we are seeing, there's a teacher out there that I like to refer to. She's in the Common Lexicon, Satara, American, and somebody was just mentioning her. I can't think. There are a number of teachers out there today who have mass appeal and who they're really working with to evolve en masse is the developing consciousness community, the triggering into spirituality, sort of the larger part of our tribe. So I want to bring that as a parallel to kind of where we are now that we're leaving Samaria.
Yeah. With them, making a mess of Samaria and the whole lot crumbling to dust and the end of their civilization.
Is that about how that went?
Yeah, pretty much.
So then let's move on then, because the next one that becomes of note to us is really the Egyptians.
Yeah, totally. Because as I say, there's little pockets of people spaced around to be able to start to populate the planet. What we think of as Egypt now was one of those. Its original name that I remember was Hypta, and they were the Hyptians. So you can see where Egyptians and Hyptians have kind of morphed over the centuries. When we think of Egypt now, we think of sand and pyramids and temples and structures. The beginning of Hypta was very, very different. I touched on briefly earlier the fact that the poles have shifted over the last 20,000 years, or 26,000 nearly. And that goes to show how the planet flora and fauna has shifted too. When we think of areas now that are lush rainforest, we are thinking South America. Yeah, we go straight there, don't we? Imagine those rainforests used to be where Egypt is now. There was no Sahara. That didn't exist. That whole area was lush, fertile land. Still is now to a certain degree when you think of the Nile inundation and the rich black soil on the banks of the Nile, is really what the sand is covering. That richness will still be there at a certain depth. But yeah, wow. The equivalent to a nuclear weapon created the Sahara. So this is why we see the sand and what we see there now.
But at what point did we have that brilliance and madness? Was this towards the end of the Sumerian? Is that what happened? I mean,
yeah, there was quite a lot going on with experimentation, with the we are a brilliant civilization, we're going to take over the planet kind of type thought going on. So here endeth the lushness. But yeah, it was beautiful.
Satara, with this, and I think it's worth pointing out to our listeners too that if a benevolent set of scientists, so to speak, such as yourself and the story we just had with Australia could be occurring, we can also know that there were other players who came to the party with opposing or other interests from the benevolence, just for their own interests, because of what the earth offered in its form relative to, again, it'll go back to what we've talked about before, to its gold, to its minerals, to its uranium, to its other metals. When this begins to remind me to say that, it's a little bit open season on the planet. And this again continues the rippling of these Orion wars. Yeah. And why all these wars.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, odd as it may seem, byproducts of sand are worth a lot in other civilizations.
To my point. My point. Byproducts of sand.
Yeah, because if you think of all of the crystallization that's there, the fact that that can be morphed into plasma types, it can be glass is what we think of most commonly here. Glass can be altered into other things. Diamonds are actually worth money off planet. Although, yeah, it hurts me how diamonds are dealt with on this planet. The fact that they have to be like in some sort of cartel to be part of being able to handle a diamond. It just is crackers to me how that kind of works. But I can get how it works because we're mirroring something elsewhere.
Okay, because we're entrained, programmed to mirror that.
Yeah, to certain programs, and it just amazes me we haven't broken out of something so stupid at the moment, because they wouldn't have the value of them that we have to cope with here if we'd kind of broken out of that. But yeah, so yeah, you can understand why for some beings that wouldn't value flora, fauna and life forms, but they valued what they could be annihilated into was worth more to them, so therefore it was removed.
The other thing you're reminding me to bring up is how the human species has again and again and again been created as a workforce, for lack of better terms, and how we are still today. And I think this is why Satara and I are doing this series, as we head into where we are now, that we are harnessed as a workforce. Because how do you get diamonds out? How do you get gold out? How do you get uranium out? There's a level of harnessing humans. There's a reason why in some aspects of our communities, this is referred to as a prison planet.
Yeah, totally.
There's a reason why we are starting to understand the nature of emotional energy, not just physical energy, and the benefits of entraining a certain reaction and response from the individual, from the group consciousness relative to pain and suffering, because it is actually a form of electromagnetic energy. So we'll touch back that way as we go too.
It's worthwhile just bringing in the phrase of the hive mind. That the greater consciousness is still tapped at a certain level to be able to only tap into what you are able to tap into from the way the human suits have been designed. Even though we're tapping into higher things, some of us at the moment, to be able to start to like break out from within that in training, you're not talking 5% of the population would be able to even touch near it, let alone break through that layer. But that is a deliberate part of the programming here, to dumb everybody down, to make sure that they were going to be subservient and carry on doing the work and not perhaps realize quite what they were doing.
Right. And I think, and I like that we can talk about this and we can stay out of, one of the things that's been really difficult for me as a starseed individual who woke up to that and woke up to the way shower aspect of self, and then the remembrances, one of the biggest difficulties I've never been prone to just nattering on and chatting with any old body about these perspectives. I found my community, so to speak, and it's minuscule. But is how it triggers and trips over into the conspiracy theory worlds, where these are people who do not have gnosis. They have remembrances, something's triggering them, or they have some level or piece of an insight that becomes the storyline for them, and then they join with others who have more of that and less of the gnosis. So there's also a level of getting exposed to that and going, okay, I'm staying back from that, because while they are kind of right, there's no point in joining with that, because they can't know the other pieces to that make it holistic and make it less dramatic, and make it less about nefariousness and more about just what is. Am I making sense, Atara?
Yeah, totally, because it's like, I have an acceptance of it, because I know I cannot change how it is at this point. It would take every last soul on the planet to wake up, smell the coffee, and go no more, en masse. And that's not going to happen, because that isn't what this is designed for.
Right. That's not it's not the game. It's not the program. It's not the code. It's not the use whatever. It's not the song being sung. Use whatever, get you through the night around the holistic viewpoint. And that's why people like us can be so calm and comfortable and just having a middle-aged lady chat, because we have it from this perspective, and it makes us a little unusual. And if we go too far out of our inner core of people to talk about things like this, then we get kind of a little bit vomited on from all the other, either from the patently closed down program and trained people, we become objects for that, or for that other community, we become like, oh, so you're one of us. I'm like, no, we're not. So it really gets to be, it really trains us, it certainly has trained me to be very quietly individualistic, know who I am, know what I'm here to do and what my level of service is, and to stay aligned to that, to do your self-care, which is, we've talked a lot about that in the show. So as we move through that Hayiptans to the Egyptian viewpoint, these people were an entirely different set of beings than the Sumerians?
Afterwards, yes. Predominantly, Egypt is quite a complicated place. I know that in other shows we've touched on, like the Egyptian pantheon, and the fact that the different forms that we have shown to us as the Egyptian gods and goddesses were not totally human. They were forms of human hybrids. I'm going to use Horus as one of the most famous example, the falcon-headed god, showing that basically his dominant DNA was avian, so therefore he shows up on temple reliefs and carvings and all sorts of antiquities in that way. But that was just saying, well, look, he's an avian. It wasn't saying that he had a head like a falcon, but that was the way of expressing it explicitly to make it understandable in an easier way here. Because they were very, very much into their DNA. Very, very much. Which makes me think, well, I suppose really, that the blend of the souls in that area were a mix of the scientist type that we had in Atlantis. So they're interested in poking stuff about and learning about it. And you've also got the very overt Atla-Ra aspect of it for the priesthood. That really was strong in Hayipta, and then what we think of as Egypt. Very, very strong. And we can see that now with what's left. Just look at some of the architecture that is around. I love the Sphinx at Giza. It cracks me up amazingly, because you think of all of the gods and goddesses had got human bodies and heads of something else. The Sphinx had got a human head and the body of a lion, has done it totally the other way around. And I think whoever came up with that probably thought it was the best practical joke they could ever leave on the planet, because that was the other side of the formula that they'd given for the whole that was carved on thousands of structures all across the whole of the land.
Does this account for why they were, so if they were in so deep with DNA and research and understandings, why then the emphasis and what got left of the emphasis that's impressed us so much this time still in humanity of the at death, what happens at death, and the storyline at death, and teaching others about what happens and how you do death.
And how you do death, the weighing the feather against the heart. Yeah, to weigh the life that you've lived. That is just really talking to people about how you are in a way judged, but it is yourself that is judging you.
Yeah. So this awareness, that's a level of consciousness there.
Yeah, it is. Very, very much so. And the fact that a feather was used to prove that purity was light and weighed nothing. What do your sins weigh? Or do your misdeeds weigh? What have you weighed on yourself within this lifetime?
This begins, though, to me, in our timeline of human history, best way to put it, or people's history. Because what do you call Horus? You know, people, not a human, people, but beings that. It brought a level of consciousness that began, to me, as in the evolutionary process to where we are today, to why you and I can sit here and have these levels of conversations on what would still be called a prison planet, which is what makes our kind so almost highly dangerous to the lack of sovereignty that we're talking about, that is required in order to heave out a bunch of gold or to heave out a bunch of minerals or to be made available for lots of experiments or whatever that has gone on. It makes us really, it's an evolutionary principle that is on planet that speaks to that. What I think is, what I have decided as I'm in an American, as I've said to you, an American mystery school motif right now in my education, the cosmic Christos, the cosmic Christ story, because I see the roots of things like that even as far back as there, and the trip through, and then teaching people how the birth and the death and rebirth pattern. Is there no other time on the planet that we know of as specific as this Hypton time, where this was so becoming the more common gnosis?
Very much so. It was. This is why so many people are drawn to Egypt. They might not know why they're drawing pyramids. They aren't, when they're doodling and bored. Yeah, they're creating these things, and it is all going back to that time there when really, as you say, the seeding of it was all put there. I mean, if you look at that whole feather against the heart, you're talking karma there.
Right.
You're talking the whole concept of the fact that whatever you've done, you've got to balance out in some way. Most people, when they think of karma, they think that they've all got to be like in the white light side of things waving, but actually it's being that grey line. It is not being overtly light, it is not being overtly dark, it is sitting in the middle and accepting it all. And knowing that we've all played every role throughout the whole of that spectrum across our fractal lives, so that we could learn about every aspect of pattern that was conceivable.
And you see it emerging more specifically in this populace of beings that we're going to call humans, but we know that they are just really peoples. And that's sort of what I've also, people, for lack of, because I've almost stopped wanting to use the word human because I think, peoples. So move us then into, as we move away from the incredible evolutionary stuff, I think that was Egypt, ancient, and then and as it went on, to then, because today's Egypt looks very much like the rest of the world. To me.
I've got a fantastic photograph that I took from the base of the Sphinx, looking across Cairo, and I look at smog. Yeah. Less than a mile away.
Right. So it was a period of time of importance, I think, in particular, the Hayat time.
It also linked very, very closely to the Mayan civilization.
That's it. So moving towards, you mentioned something called Göbekli Tepe. Easy for you to say.
That is huge. If anybody wants to kind of look that up, I'll put a note in when we do the notes for the show for that. But yeah, that is quite vast in itself. Very on a par with ancient Egypt. Not that far away on the grand scheme of things in Turkey. Just across a bit of water. Really, if you think, the north of Egypt is on the Mediterranean. Where is Turkey on the Mediterranean? You're not talking that far apart.
Well, you're making me think too that to mention the Earth's body, her body, and her where her body parts are. And I know, let's see, is that area, and then we have Syria, and we have all of that, Turkey, that whole area. Is this not the womb of creation?
Pretty much.
This is the womb of the Mother Earth. For those of you who take a look at the body parts of the planet, because and over in Australia, I think we have a heart. Is that the heart?
No, we're kind of. We're kind.
What is a Luru? What is a Luru body part there? That's there. What is that?
Good question.
I think there's an important, the reason why it's so interesting today, and the energies are so interesting today there, is because there's an important body part there, just as why it was so interesting for Turkey and Egypt to be around Syria, and what's going on today in Syria and Turkey, and what's really
there. Let me ponder on that.
Ponder on that one.
Yeah, I'm going to keep that dripping in the back of my head going, because it will come to me.
It'll come to you. And then moving in, then, how is it then to your mind, does Maya come up, does the Mayan race come on the heels in your consideration of this timeline? Why is it Mayan?
I am aware that there was a portal between the temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak that actually linked to Chichen Itza, pyramid, temple, whatever you want to call it, of the Mayans. And I know for a fact that existed, and it used, ironically, a water conduit.
Wow.
We don't think of much water in Egypt, but as we now know, it was rainforest and very, very wet and damp and all the rest of it. It now makes sense for the water conduit because it linked directly to another rainforest, which still exists in part.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And because And what is so important for us to remember about the Mayan peoples?
Well, I think it's, the main thing for me is to remember that we could travel that way at that time. So imagine walking into a small room, picking up, there's a bowl in front of you with all sorts of crystalline in, picking up a particular piece of crystalline in your hand, walking to the room behind the one that you're in, holding that crystal, closing your eyes, and then opening your eyes 2 seconds later to be in a different room of the same shape and size in a totally different other part of the world.
And this would have been the spiritual class. This would have been the priesthood.
Yes. That could move between the two. And I know that 100% because I did it. And I find it fascinating that we'd still got that level of travel that was happening. We could do that in Lemuria, we could do that in Atlantis. That was still happening between those two civilizations. I didn't experience those portals anywhere else on the planet, but in those two places.
And Sitara, was it the Mayans? Or I sometimes get it confused with the...
You're thinking Aztecs. Aztec thinkers, Mayans. To me, they were all pretty much the same, but just at different times.
Just at different times in the timeline, in that epic. And which group, literally the whole group, left together?
Yeah.
Who was that? Was that was the Incans?
That was the Incans, just disappeared overnight.
I love that, actually.
Plague wiped them out, but I'm not quite so sure on that. I think they probably said, okay, can we go now? And they said, have you got your ticket ready? I'm like, yeah, I'm here.
The reason I know, what's that movie? There's a movie that makes me think of that, a good one. I can't think of it, but it makes me think too of what we know about the Dogon tribe. The Dogon, have left information for us over time about where they got their information about how to start their society, that they were very clear that it came from Sirius B.
Yeah, totally. And you're then talking about the Nommo race, which is the
Nommo race.
Yeah, the amphibian human race. Oh yeah, totally.
It makes me think this, and I guess in some years past with you and I, as I was having an awakening around some of my own connections with Sirius, I really saw these beings in a what I would call a classical conference setting, that were doing a presentation, and I was just in the audience. And remember, I sent you sketches.
Yeah,
and I was like, no, we know these people. We know these people.
And I've actually got a crystal carving of a Nommo here that I've got of the actual face of one of those beings that has been done as a crystal skull carving.
As a skull. It's just fascinating then. So you're saying that the Egyptian, some portion of their spiritual class and priest class had developed in a way to be able to then connect via the Temple of Karnak through a water conduit, through a portal to the Mayan societies.
Yeah, totally, to the one temple there, which is interesting. But what I think is worthwhile saying to people as well, a lot of books that talk about ancient Egypt and they talk about the 3 main pyramids at Giza, they talk about the Orion connection. Actually, it isn't the Orion connection, it's the Sirius connection.
Okay.
Again, think about the pole shift that this planet has had. So imagine where the pole is now. If we're looking at the world map with like the UK smack in the middle to go for the Greenwich Mean Time line, if we then tilt that by roughly 18 degrees to the west, the left, whichever way you want to put it, then start looking at the star alignment.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Scary.
It's Sirius. It's not Orion.
Yeah.
Which goes to show how this planet has changed with that pole shift, which has been part of, obviously, the control of the planet was that pole shift. There's indigenous tribes at the moment that are talking about the pole is starting to shift again because the skies are changing. That shift is actually starting to go back to the original pole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Once we see that original pole, that will be part of the end of the control on this planet.
We will have graduated our prison planet status.
Yeah, we will have.
Wow.
We will get back to where we should have been before the cataclysm of the end of Atlantis. So we're working our way from that devastation back out the other side.
Well, this conversation and the time frame here too brings us really to the end of another really rich conversation between us, Satara, and I really have always been grateful for being able to have these. For me, they are no nonsense conversations that I really can't have with anyone else, because that's just how rare it is. So this series and then this show will end for me a delightful period of my life that I was able to share a conversation with you at such a level of gnosis that it's exquisitely rare, and I will privately know I was able to have it, and then push it out into the ethers. It hardly matters where it goes. It's just that I was able to have it in my lifetime.
Very much so, because it's like so many people, for whatever reason, are still so afraid to open their mouths. How many people will be listening to this that will know some of what we've talked about, will know it as deeply as we do, but will have nowhere to necessarily go yep, I know that, out loud? Because there's no one in their sphere of consciousness that is able to bat that ball back. And I think you get to a certain point in your lifetime here that you can't shut up anymore. You think, that's rubbish what you're talking over there. That's absolutely so far away from the reality of as it was, that you have to sometimes just bite that bullet and just open your mouth and just think, you'll either accept it or you won't, but I will feel better for speaking it.
Oh, and I think that's so well said, because you all as listeners, I was asking Satara what she thought about how to end the conversation for the entire show. And it really did come down to really hoping that these kinds of conversations we've had, for your reference, will help you be free and work on your own sovereignty, to speak out truth, your insights, your experience of self, embodied self, because this is what is called for at the end of this harmonic as we begin another one. We are the bringers of the new dawn. We are the bringers of the new dawn. You will find works all over the place where they talk about this, that it is not anyone else, it is you. It is us in our electromagnetic energy bodies. We carry that Akash in our entire system. And we are also watchers. We are the ones recording this for the Akashic record and the Kahanic that Satara has taught us about in prior shows. That you will find ways to be conversant and to become thoughtful in your communication around these things. That you will be able to have these conversations and find another with him to have them, and to do so without drama, without what I call sensuousness and sensuous costume-like narrative that we see so much in the internet. You all who know me at all through the show, I abhor that. Without what I call magical whimsy, and just make it more, accept it as fact, ground it with logic and reason, versus the seduction of the narrative that exists. I couldn't beat feet fast enough out of that as I awakened more fully to myself. So that's my last few words. Wishing you all much peace and love. So Tara, what would you like to take us out on?
I think it's just good to remember that for things to flow well, they have to flow with ease and grace. If they do not flow with ease and grace, you're going against the current. The current is there for a reason, to not paddle against. We spend a lot of our time here paddling against the current because we do not like certain aspects of what goes on here. But all we learn that we do is we wear ourselves out so that we're not able to do what we're here to do. And that's simply to just experience this, get different levels of understanding about it, and move on. New suit, please.
Next suit. And I wish you, Satara, that place of balance and peace and comfort and a gentle ride into your next expression. And as much as I wish that for myself and for everyone who listens, thank you for being with us on this conversational journey between two middle-aged ladies just wanting to talk about what they know.
Yeah, the randomness that is us. So without further ado, thank you very much for taking part in this, as Amber has so eloquently said. And we hope that you travel with as much ease and grace as is possible on this planet. So I will say goodbye from myself.
And I say goodbye.
Bye-bye.